Thank you for joining us today. We wanted to take a few minutes to discuss what does SIEM do and why do I need it. So there's a couple of important parts when companies are looking for a SIEM, and you want to understand the objectives that they're trying to achieve. And you also want to understand the goals of the organization. So with those two things in mind, we're going to move a little forward here. What does SIEM do? So a SIEM essentially is a log collector on steroids, plus a whole bunch of stuff. Log collection is important. You need to be able to collect syslog and netflow and sflow and jflow, and all of these logs need to come into a centralized bucket. Once that happens, you normalize the logs based on time, based on metadata, based on the source that they came from, and what context does that source supply us. So if it's coming from a switch, or if it's coming from a firewall, or if it's coming from antivirus or anti-malware engine, those types of things. What the SIEM does is it's able to look across the entire environment, your firewalls, your switches, your Amazon infrastructure, your Office 365 infrastructure. And from there, it is able to determine and make alarms based on X amount of information that it has received, and it makes a determination on whether that should have an alarm and there is enough incident information to actually create an event out of. So from there, it's super important to have people behind a SIEM. A SIEM is not a set it and forget it type of mentality. We need to be able to have people behind the SIEM because the people are constantly tweaking and tuning the SIEM in order to make sure that the logs that are coming into that SIEM are normalized, that the regex and the parsing rules are firing correctly, and that the events that are being created are actually events that are legitimate. So that is all super important, and that is first part of why do I need a SIEM. How does a SIEM work? So I explained that we do log collection, that we do API connections. We basically ingest all of the log data and all of the information in a normalized format into the SIEM. The SIEM has a couple more pieces though that are super important. There is both an artificial intelligence engine in some SIEMs. There's also machine learning in some SIEMs. And then there's also user behavior analytics, the ability to look at historical logs and historical trends inside of your logs and your data that is getting fed into the SIEM, and be able to do predictive analytics. Super important. And it's very informational to the security analysts that are sitting behind the scenes every day watching and helping to identify incidents or events that may lead up to a breach. When you have all of that going on inside of a SIEM, a few more pieces that are important to go along with this is you want to be able to measure the time to respond to an alert. You want to be able to measure mean time to detection, mean time to respond, and also a mean time to actually close out the event, so that you get some KPIs around how quickly you're able to identify that there's a potential problem going on and the ability to respond to it. A third aspect in there that I see and that we even see inside of our clients is the SIEM is very instrumental at helping the IT team and the C-level, CIO, CTO, CISO, be able to make a determination on what is actually happening inside their environment. So a couple of examples might be is they didn't realize that a vendor or a contractor could VPN into the environment and get around quite easily inside the environment, and it wasn't supposed to be that way. They didn't think that they were supposed to set it up that way, but it did. Or they didn't realize that traffic was actually going across multiple VLANs when actually traffic was actually supposed to be just going to a couple of VLANs or one specific VLAN. So When you have network application detection, you have network monitoring happen, as well as the logs coming from firewalls and switches and the endpoint, you now are able to do data correlation across all of those information or infrastructure pieces, if you will. And what I mean by that is you can do data correlation all the way from the endpoint through the timeline of that data packet all the way out to the firewall until it leaves your building or your ISP. When you have the SIEM working properly, data correlation happens across all of those data points. And what I mean by that is you have the endpoint, you have the switches, you have the network monitor, you have the firewall, you maybe even have some other aspects in the infrastructure, but you get data correlation that happens across that whole timeline of a network packet. So when you're evaluating a SIEM, there's a few key points that I'd like to just point out. One, you want to be able to connect to all of your infrastructure, all of your software applications. Basically, everything that you own that is an IT asset, you want to be able to send the logs to the SIEM. One, you're going to need to make sure that that SIEM is actually able to ingest those logs and you're able to normalize them. The second part of that is you're going to want to think through, what do those logs mean to me and what do the logs mean to the organization, and what security risk do they play? Are they the logs from your Salesforce.com and your CRM where all of your customer information is held? Do you want the logs from your databases? Well, of course you do. That's probably because you house really critical information there. Do you want the logs from your web servers so that you can potentially experience or understand where these simple pokes or these small attacks are coming from that lead up to a much greater, a much larger attack? So a SIEM can be able to help you identify those. But evaluating in a SIEM and making sure that that SIEM is the right SIEM product for you and your organization is super important. If you today are not able to see everything from a cloud product that you might be using, like a SaaS product, all the way down to your internal infrastructure, all the way to your endpoints where your internal users are consuming the data, using the data, and interacting with your customers and your partners and your vendors and other employees, then you probably need a SIEM. And that's because you need to be able to understand what threat vectors are going to be used against you inside of an attack. You need to understand what's going on out in Office 365 or wherever your email is held, Gmail or on-premise Exchange or another product. You need to understand what's going on inside of your AWS or your Azure. You need to understand what's going on with inside of your on-premise infrastructure equipment. And you need to understand what's going on if you're consuming a cloud-based file system, or if your endpoints and your users roam across a continent for sales, marketing, or you just have a distributed workforce. You need to understand that that workforce may not be sitting behind an enterprise firewall every day. And then so therefore that endpoint is susceptible to some sort of an attack, and then that attack is then brought back into the enterprise. That is the power of a SIEM.